All right, we're jumping into one of the most famous stories ever told, the very beginning of humanity, in a place called Eden. Now, we're not going to get into all the different interpretations. Instead, we're just going to look directly at the original text to see exactly how this ancient story unfolds, one step at a time.
So that's the big question, right? How does one of the world's oldest texts actually describe the very dawn of humanity? We're going to look purely at the source for the answer. And according to this story, it all starts not with some huge bang, but with a very quiet, waiting world.
Okay, so before any people show up on the scene, the text kind of sets the stage for us. It paints a picture of a planet that's totally primed for life, but it's missing a couple of crucial ingredients. And what's really fascinating here is what isn't there yet. The text says there were no wild plants or grains growing. And why? Because the Lord God hadn't sent any rain. Instead, you've got these springs coming up from the ground, watering everything. But the most important missing piece, there was nobody there to actually work the soil. The stage was perfectly set, you could say, for a gardener.
And that is exactly what comes next. The story brings in the first human, but he doesn't just, pop into existence. The text describes a very specific two-part process for how he was formed.
Yeah, the account is super precise here. It says first, a physical form is sculpted from the dust of the ground, which right away links humanity directly to the earth itself. But that form, it's not alive yet. Not until the second step happens. The breath of life is breathed into his nostrils. And it's this combination, this union of the earthly and something more, that the text says creates a living person.
So, now that the man exists, he's given a place to live. And it's not just any old place. It's this special cultivated environment, a place with a purpose, but also a place with one very, very important rule. The story describes this incredible, lush garden. It's planted in a place called Eden, and it's filled with beautiful trees with delicious fruit. It's watered by this huge river that splits into 4 famous branches, the Pishon, Gihon, Tigris, and Euphrates. But right smack in the middle of it all, there are 2 trees that are absolutely critical to the entire story, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
So you might be wondering, why was the man put in this perfect garden? Well, the text gives him a really clear job description. He's not just there to chill out and enjoy the view. His purpose is to tend and watch over it. He is, essentially, its first caretaker.
And here it is, the one single rule. What's so crucial here is the amount of freedom he has combined with this one single absolute restriction. The command is, you may freely eat the fruit of every tree in the garden, which is pretty amazing, right? But then comes the except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the consequence for breaking this one rule couldn't be clearer. If you eat its fruit, you are sure to die. But the story doesn't end there, not by a long shot, because the narrative now introduces its very first problem. Yeah, even in this perfect garden with this perfect setup, something is still not right.
The text is super explicit about it. We get this direct statement. It is not good for the man to be alone. So right there, solitude is identified as a problem. And that immediately triggers the search for a solution. I will make a helper who is just right for him. Now, the first attempt to solve this loneliness problem is really interesting. The text says that God forms all the wild animals and all the birds from the ground the same way the man was formed, and then brings them to the man. And what's his job? He has to give a name to every single one. This is him, establishing his relationship with the whole animal kingdom.
But after this whole grand parade of life, after every single creature has been given its name, the text delivers this really key line. But still, there was no helper just right for him. The search was a bust. Out of all those amazing animals, none of them was the right kind of companion. The problem of the man's solitude, still unsolved.
So that failure, it perfectly sets the stage for a second attempt. And this time, it's a much more direct and a totally different act of creation. This really becomes the climax of this part of the story.
And the process described here is completely different from what came before. Think about it. The man and the animals, they were all formed from the ground. But this new being is created from the man himself. He's put into a deep sleep, one of his ribs is taken, and then from that very rib, the woman is made. And then she's brought to the man.
The man's reaction is just, wow. It's immediate, it's powerful, it's this cry of recognition, of relief.
At last. He sees her and he instantly gets it. He understands their connection, that they're made of the very same stuff. This one is bone from my bone and flesh from my flesh, he says. And that's why he names her woman, because as the text points out, she was taken from man.
And the story doesn't just leave it there. It immediately connects this incredible moment to a universal human experience. The text concludes this whole section by saying that this event is the origin of why a man and woman are united and become one.
And this is where this part of the story pauses, on this really profound final image. It says, now the man and his wife were both naked, but they felt no shame. It's describing a state of just complete innocence, complete transparency between the two of them and their world. They're naked, but the concept of shame, it doesn't even exist yet. And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. What does a world without shame actually look like?